One of the biggest, if not the biggest, development that's coming out in the past couple of weeks is another stage in the Breonna Taylor case. I believe last week the city actually settled a civil suit with Breonna Taylor's family to include $12 million. And they had about a dozen, I think even more, police reforms that they would administer to kind of prevent the situation from happening with Breonna Taylor. For those who don't know, Breonna Taylor was killed when a warrant was being served at her house. There was some gunfire. Breonna Taylor was in the house with her boyfriend. The boyfriend shot at the cops, actually shot the cop. And then in the midst of the gunfire, Breonna Taylor was shot anywhere from 5 to 6 times. That number has been conflicted with the recent developments, but she was actually the only one to die from that situation. And again, last week, the city actually settled with Breonna Taylor's family, giving her $12 million and then pledging to change their system as far as how warrants are being obtained, incentivizing police to actually serve and volunteer and live in the communities that they're actually going to be patrolling in. And after that settlement was announced, a lot of people had speculation it was some hush money, or that was a very large sum of money. So the city actually said, like, this is not an admission of guilt, but we do recognize that this was some things that went wrong, so we want to make sure that we can make some changes. After that, the mayor actually was declaring a state of emergency in anticipation of the district attorney announcing if criminal charges would be brought up on the 3 officers that were involved in the actual shooting of Breonna Taylor. So more recently, the district attorney actually came out and said that only one of the officers would be charged, but not in the actual murder or homicide of Breonna Taylor, but 3 counts of wanton endangerment, because 3 of his shots went into an adjacent apartment that housed, or I think it was 5 shots, went into an adjacent apartment that housed a pregnant woman, her child, and her husband. So the shots being fired put those individuals in danger, and that is actually what he was being charged with, not exactly the murder or the homicide of Breonna Taylor. So a lot of people thought that this was an injustice, started speaking out about it. A lot more protests, a lot more riots, a lot more damage is being done around the country, actually, because this is being seen as no justice for Breonna Taylor. And Breonna Taylor has become kind of the person to the forefront, because when the George Floyd situation happened, it seemed like everybody sprung into action. Like, if there was immediate action, there was immediate outcry, things were being done. But with Breonna Taylor, that's where the reemergence of Say Her Name came from, because it felt like she was just being pushed to the back burner and nothing was actually happening. So with that development, a lot of people are saying, who were calling for justice for Breonna Taylor, felt as though there is no justice for Breonna Taylor, because the only charges that were brought against the officer don't even have to deal with Breonna Taylor herself. So wanted to kind of break down the different angles, because there have been a lot of responses, a lot of people chiming in, a lot of celebrity responses that actually has something to say about it too. But we just kind of want to break it down from our point of view as well.
Yeah. I'm torn up about it a little bit, man, but not in a way that you would think. So, my feelings are, obviously, I feel for Breonna Taylor, obviously, long before this even happened. The family, everybody that's involved. $12 million ain't worth a life. So I don't. If they can get that $12 million back and get Breonna Taylor back, I'm sure they would. So that to me is trash. It happens a lot, right? It's not a admission of guilt. It's just kind of, sorry it happened, if you would. So my feelings on it is it is what it is. But as far as legally, unfortunately, you have explained this to me several times over on this podcast. There was a very small percentage of any of these cops actually going to jail for what they did. The reason being is because it's, for them, standard procedure, right? They had somebody, there was, at the time, no-knock warrants were fine, right? You can no-knock warrant, you could run somebody's house. You don't have to announce yourself. You could just run anybody's house, right? As long as you had a warrant for it. They got fired at. One of the officers was struck, and at that point they were good to go. They good to fire. They were able to let off everything they had if they needed to. So I'm not saying that's right. Honestly, I think to me it's obvious that that's wrong, but they are protected by certain laws, and those are the things that we need to look at. I think qualified immunity to me is should be the big goal. We did get a win with the no knock warrants being illegal now, so you can't do that anymore in Louisville. But I think the bigger picture is for America is to rewrite a law that's been written hasn't been looked at since 1967. I mean, qualified immunity was 1960s. Like, it's a lot of laws that we got like that, but this one is still taking a big picture into today. Like, if you really read up on it, and I won't go into it because it gets extremely complicated, but the basis of qualified immunity is you really can't get arrested or charged for anything that you do as long as it doesn't violate anybody's human rights. But it has to be clearly stated. So whether that be in a previous court case, whether that be in a previous written law or something like that, it has to be at that time. It has to be something that was written. So if the no knock warrants were illegal at the time and they broke into the house, well, then obviously all three of them could get acquitted for that because it was against the law. But since that law wasn't in there, there's no similar cases like that you can actually go back to. There's almost no way you're arresting any of them. So we can look at A, qualified immunity, and B, we got to look at the standard procedures. Like, what are the standard procedures? I know for a fact, for me, when I looked at the case, the biggest thing that I had was the first report that they wrote. I felt like it was a lot of misinformation on there. There was no mention of Kenneth Walker, who actually shot and struck somebody. It said that the victim, Breonna Taylor, had no injuries. It said that they had no forced entry, meaning somebody let them in. There was a lot of things on that first report that don't make sense to me. Somebody should be held liable for that. You can't write faulty reports. That's falsifying documents. Like, those type of things is what we got to look at to say, like, how did this happen? We talked about last time, like, who wrote the warrant? Like, what was on the warrant? What about the judge? It's a lot of people that we got to come at, but unfortunately, they were never going to get arrested. It wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to get arrested for killing Breonna Taylor. If that's the justice you were looking for, then I'm sorry to inform you that's never going to come. It never was going to come. It's sad to say, but that's kind of the truth of the matter at this point.
Yeah, and I'll say this because it's a lot of things we need to be clear about what happened with Breonna Taylor. And I think with the press conference that the Attorney General gave, he laid out all of the facts that he had and all of the facts that he presented to the grand jury. So I might get long-winded on this one, so forgive me in advance. But one, the Attorney General didn't determine that those were the charges that will be filed. It was not him that said, we are only going to file this. The Attorney General presented all of the facts to a grand jury. Now, grand jury is just like a trial jury, is a group of people, typically between 16 and 23 people, that hear the evidence and determine if there is going to be probable cause to actually bring forth a charge. So for people demonizing and calling out this Attorney General, calling him a coon, calling him a sellout, and saying all skin folk ain't kinfolk, this person was just doing their job. All that he did was lay out the evidence and present it to a grand jury. So if you really got a problem with these charges, or if you feel like something wasn't being done, I don't find it acceptable just to demonize this one person when all they did was just lay out the evidence for somebody else to bring forth those charges. So I'm not with all that slander of the Attorney General because of his political affiliation, because he's married to a white woman, because you don't think that he's a real black man. That's childish, and that don't get us nowhere. That's just as racist as the people that you claim to be fighting against. That's not cool, bro. I'm not with that at all. So understand that the grand jury actually brought forth those charges. Second of all, we need to clear up some misconceptions from the beginning of this case when it first started and then what actually was found out. So a lot of the outrage is saying that, well, Breonna Taylor was shot while she was sleeping in her bed. Everybody can account to Breonna Taylor was in the hallway with Kenneth, with her boyfriend. Not saying that she deserved to be shot. I'm going to preface all of this saying, I think it's a tragedy. And I've said this time and time again. This is a tragedy. She should not have been killed. This was just a like a perfect storm of bad circumstances. It's terrible that this happened. So let me just get that right out there. I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying all of that, but we need to understand what's going on before we start throwing stones or before we start critiquing people, because if we don't handle this right, we're going to do the same thing the next time this happens. And that is our problem. Every 4 years, every 3 years, every 2 years, a situation like this happens. We're being told a story. We respond emotionally, and nothing gets changed because we don't understand what happened. Breonna Taylor was up. She was in the hallway when shots were fired. That's how she got shot, because she was in the line of fire once the shots started firing. I think it's Kenneth Walker, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had the right under the Castle Doctrine to shoot fire because he claimed that he didn't hear the cops announce themselves. So he had the right to defend himself and his property by shooting the cops. He was initially charged with attempted murder of a cop, but those charges were dropped because he had the right. He didn't know that there were cops coming into his house. So he was right in defending himself. The 3 cops that were charged or under suspicion of, arrested cops that killed Breonna Taylor, they had nothing to do with the warrant. They were just brought along as manpower to issue that warrant or to deliver that warrant. They were not involved in the process of obtaining that warrant. They were just people, hey, we're about to deliver a warrant, come down to the scene. They had no prior knowledge of that. So to say that this was some type of conspiracy and they're wanting to hunt her down and all of that, nah, bro. They were just people there at the scene. Now, the one officer that just started busting the gun, the one that actually got charged with wanton endangerment, he had a faulty record. This was an issue of a cop. He's been doing these type of things throughout his career. So like how we brought up with the George Floyd case, and when you were saying like we need to start looking at these cops' record and why they're at the scenes to do these things, that's a problem. If you look at his record, he should not have been in this type of situation because he has proven that he is reckless with the gun. And that's why he was fired, because it's standard procedure not to fire your weapon unless you have a line of sight with who you're shooting at. And he just was shooting through a window with curtains drawn. He didn't know what was in there. They didn't even know that Breonna Taylor wasn't in the house alone. So he was just busting through the window. And that's why he just started letting off clips, and they actually went into an adjacent apartment. So that in itself, that's a problem. Breonna Taylor, they had that warrant for Breonna Taylor's house because they suspected that she was involved with her ex-boyfriend's operations. Not to say that she was, not to say that that's right, not to say that they weren't wrong, because they didn't find any drugs there. They thought that her house or her apartment was a distribution center based on the warrants and all the surveillance that they did, because he was getting packages delivered to her house, and she actually rented out a car to her ex-boyfriend, and then somebody got killed in that car, and she had to come in for questioning for that. So she was connected to him in a real way, but that's not to say that she deserved to be issued that warrant. But again, that is a separate investigation, which is my next point. This investigation or these charges were just from the district attorney to see if criminal charges need to be filed in the murder of Breonna Taylor. Once they looked at the statute and they said that her boyfriend had the right to fire his weapon at the cops, and the cops, once fired upon, had the right to return fire, the result is tragic. But you can't charge anybody with homicide or murder or manslaughter when both sides have the right to shoot their weapons at who they think is a perceived threat. They both thought that they were shooting at dangerous criminals. Kenneth Walker thought that he was shooting at criminals breaking into his house trying to kill him, so he had that right to shoot. The police, as they're entering their house, thought they were shooting at dangerous criminals trying to shoot the officers, so they had the right to shoot. That takes away any manslaughter or homicide or murder charges. As wrong as that may seem, that's just the letter of the law. It may not feel like justice, but to overcharge those cops, that wouldn't be justice either. There is a separate investigation still ongoing by the FBI to see that if they obtained that warrant in the wrong way, if they covered up details that shouldn't have been covered up, if the judge did not go through the proper protocol to issue that warrant because they saw that it was just copy and paste verbiage on all of the warrants, because I believe they served 5 that night. It was just copy and paste on all of the warrants. That's not how warrants are supposed to be. Each warrant, especially a no-knock warrant, is supposed to contain specific guidance and specific information about that house or that apartment that you're about to go into to justify why you would need a no-knock warrant as opposed to a knock and announce warrant. So there is a separate and still ongoing investigation to see if Breonna Taylor's civil rights were if they were violated based on that procedure. And that is still an ongoing case. There is still hope that everybody involved in that whole process can be held accountable to say that there is no reason why a report said no injuries on a person that was shot 6 times. There is no reason why there should be a report that says, we no forced entry, but you use a battering ram to knock the door off the hinges. There needs to be answers for why it took 20 minutes for somebody to go into the apartment and actually administer some type of life-saving aid to Breonna Taylor. All of that has to be accounted for, but that's going to be accounted for in a separate investigation. So again, I know that was long-winded, but we have to know our facts for situations as high profile as these, for situations that are so pivotal, and we can actually make change, and change is actually happening because of these situations. We have to know what's going on before we start talking crazy and before we start spreading misinformation, because that's what leads to rioting, that's what leads to looting, and that's what leads to destruction of our communities, and that gets us nowhere.
Yeah, I think just based off of everything that we've been saying on this podcast for many episodes now, we can't let emotions drive this. That's not what's gonna get us where we need to go. Emotions are, we know how we feel about it. We obviously, me and King, we two black men, we got sisters, we got moms. We don't want to see no black women dead. Obviously, that's not what that's if you get that from anything that he said or I said, that's not where we're going with this. Where we're going with this is that there has to be some actual action happening. There has to be some type of substance behind what we're doing. We can't just take to the streets and yell and march and do things like that. We can't just have rallies and have somebody speak and give out misinformation. We can't have a bunch of celebrities giving out misinformation. If you're doing that, that's fine. Maybe that's your way of coping. That's your coping mechanism. But at the end of the day, you have to return to reality and say, okay, there's things that need to be done. There's work that needs to be done. We have to, I don't know if it's whether it's signing a petition, a real petition that actually has some type of value, whether it be hitting up some type of congressman, whatever you think that you can do, there's some actual like actions that need to happen on the back end of this. We can't just get caught up in protecting black women right now. Like, I understand that we need to be doing that 100% of the time. But to do that in this case, we have to take to the law. We gotta get to the law. We gotta get to the facts. We gotta get to the information and see if we can make some actual change within these police departments. That's what really needs to happen. If we want some change, we have to actually make it happen. But it's not by forcing their hand, thinking that we gonna march on the streets and do things like that. That's not forcing their hand at all. We have to get into these courthouses and make sure that these laws are looked at. Make sure these things are actually looked at and changed. That's how we do it. That's, to me at least. But who am I? I'm no lawyer. But to me, at least, we actually have to have some actual substance behind what we're doing. We can't just stumble in and stumble out of emotions and think that that's going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you said that because, and again, stop me if I get too long with it, because I'm really passionate about topics like these. But we need to have a shift of mentality in our culture to stop looking at these authority positions or these offices as if we can't sit in these positions. Instead of saying that we need to defund the police, we need to become the police. Instead of saying, yo, we got all these people policing our neighborhoods. No. We need to become the police in our neighborhoods. Oh, these racist judges that are just disproportionately sentencing black people. We need to become these judges that are sitting in on these crimes happening in our neighborhoods. Oh, these district attorneys don't know, they're not prosecuting everything. We need to become these district attorneys. The same way that we can infiltrate and we can get into the NBA and we can start making rap music and we have the same capabilities to get into these systems that are quote unquote systematically racist and change that system. We can be the cops that don't shoot into an apartment without knowing who's in there. We can be the judge who doesn't approve a no-knock warrant because they think somebody's involved in a drug ring because they got some packages, which actually happen to be shoes and clothes for an ex-boyfriend after they got out of jail. We need to be these people in the positions of power to stop this from happening. Because if we keep drawing that line of division between us, these things continue to happen. If we had black cops that grew up in that neighborhood knowing what needs to be prosecuted and they can not necessarily let slide, but how they can de-escalate situations to where people don't get shot, we won't have Jacob Blakes. We won't have George Floyd's. We won't have Breonna Taylor's, because we have people from our communities. When we get these judges, when we get district attorneys, we get politicians that know how to write laws that actually serve justice and interpret the Constitution that equally applies to everybody, no matter what your race is, white, black, Hispanic, whatever your race is. We need those laws to reflect our population, and we need to make sure that we don't have that ambiguity in the law to where when an injustice happens, we can't look to the law to actually defend us and we feel like we're not getting justice. We can have people get in those positions. It's not that hard, but we need to be in those positions. We need to stop looking at that as if that's the man, or that's for a white man, or that's the person who's holding a no. We have to just meet the criteria, figure out what it takes to be a judge, figure out what it takes to be a police officer, figure out what it takes to be a legislative writer, and get in those positions. Because if you really about making a change in this community, going out and marching ain't going to do much. Going out and looting and rioting and destroying the community, that's not going to do nothing. But you actually applying yourself, you getting your degree, and you going to the academy, you becoming a police chief, and you saying, you know what, that's not happening in my city. We're not doing that to that neighborhood. I grew up in that neighborhood. We're not about to do that. That's what makes change. You know what? This law cannot be applied to the citizens. It's disproportionately affecting those black citizens, and our police are not being held accountable. That needs to be changed. That's how you make change. Becoming a judge to say, you know what, I'm going to apply the same standard to a 40-year-old black man, to a 40-year-old white man, for the 40-year-old woman, to a 40-year-old man. I'm going to hold that standard and make sure everybody's held accountable. That's how change happens. So we need to stop looking at, yo, you need to do this because I said, no. You need to do that. You need to step up. You need to use your voice. You need to use your power. And you actually have to get into the position where you can actually bring about change. Because I'm tired of people yelling for other people to do stuff. No, you do that.
Well said, bro. Well said. You got much to add, bro. You talking that talk right there.
But who am I? I barely graduated high school. I don't have a college degree yet, so I need to take my own advice.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But that don't mean it's not a good message. That don't mean it's not well said. That don't mean it's not a good message that people need to be hearing. So
yeah, just like Tory Lane's got his flaws, but when he talk about J.R. Smith missing shots being the reason that he ride the benches, the truth is the truth, bro. He said, yo, shot percentage is the reason that you riding benches.
Bro.
Who am I? The girls them sugar.